In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But among all the countless ways to die in the service of the Emperor, few are as terrifying, as claustrophobic, and as absolutely nightmarish as fighting in a Voidship boarding action. Picture this, if you will. You are sealed inside a boarding torpedo, little more than a missile made of ceramite and adamantium, with barely enough room to stand. Around you, packed shoulder to shoulder, are your squad mates. The air is thick with the smell of sacred oils, weapon lubricant, and fear sweat, despite the temperature regulation systems. You can hear your own breathing inside your helmet, too loud, too fast. The engines scream as the torpedo accelerates, pushing you back against the restraint harness with brutal force. And then, after what feels like an eternity compressed into mere seconds, comes the impact. The crash is so violent that even through power armor or void-hardened carapace, you feel your teeth rattle. The industrial-grade drill at the torpedo's nose grinds through meters of ship hull, the sound like 1,000 chainsaws tearing through metal. Anyone standing directly on the other side of that breach point is simply gone, reduced to a fine red mist by the torpedo's entry. The assault ram's melter guns have already weakened the armor, and now the torpedo punches through, creating a hole in the enemy vessel's skin. For a moment, everything is chaos. Sirens wail on both sides of the breach. Emergency lights strobe in mad patterns, and then the hatch blows open, and you're running into hell itself. This is the reality of boarding actions in Warhammer 40,000. It's not the glorious open battlefields where titans stride and armies clash in the light of alien suns. It's not even the brutal street-to-street combat of a hive city assault. No, this is combat stripped down to its most primal, most horrifying form. This is fighting in corridors so narrow you can touch both walls with your outstretched arms. This is pushing through hatchways where a single enemy with a flamer can hold off a dozen attackers. This is every nightmare about being buried alive, combined with the knowledge that on the other side of these walls is the infinite void of space, waiting to claim you the moment something goes wrong. The ships of Warhammer 40,000 are not sleek vessels of chrome and clean lines, like you might see in other science fiction universes. These are ancient, Gothic monstrosities, some of them thousands of years old, maintained by tech priests who view them as living machine spirits requiring constant prayer and appeasement. An Imperial Navy battleship might stretch 8 kilometers from prow to stern, contain hundreds of decks, and house a crew of 250,000 souls. Inside such a vessel is a maze of corridors, chambers, chapels, weapons decks, engine rooms, habitation blocks, and forgotten sections that haven't been entered in centuries. To board such a ship and fight your way through it is to enter a three-dimensional labyrinth where death waits around every corner and the environment itself is trying to kill you. And that's assuming you're boarding a relatively normal Imperial vessel. Chaos ships have been warped by the energies of the warp itself, their corridors twisted into non-Euclidean nightmares, their walls sometimes bleeding or screaming. Orc vessels are ramshackle death traps held together by sheer belief and scrap metal, liable to explode or decompress without warning. Tyrannid bioships are living organisms where the walls are made of chitinous matter and might actually try to digest you. And space hulks, those massive conglomerations of ships fused together by centuries drifting through the warp, are quite possibly the worst of all. They're infested with everything from genestealers to demons. Their interiors a mad patchwork of different vessels from different eras, some sections in hard vacuum, others hosting their own atmospheres, and even gravity wells pointing in different directions. The tactical challenges of fighting in such an environment are immense. Long-range weapons become nearly useless in corridors that rarely stretch more than 30 meters before a turn or bulkhead. Cover is everywhere, but so are kill zones. Every junction is a potential ambush point. Every closed hatch might hide a squad of enemies or open onto a section of ship that's been vented to space. Communication becomes difficult through meters of adamantium bulkheads and the interference of the ship's own systems. And always, there's the knowledge that you're fighting inside a vessel that's simultaneously a war machine and a habitat, where a stray shot might rupture a plasma conduit or crack a coolant line, killing everyone in the vicinity, regardless of which side they're on. This is not warfare as doctrine teaches it. This is not about holding ground or achieving strategic objectives in any conventional sense. Boarding actions in Warhammer 40,000 are about survival and momentum. Once you commit to a boarding action, you cannot retreat easily. Your assault craft or boarding torpedo is now somewhere behind you, possibly destroyed by the enemy's response or simply inaccessible through the sections of ship you fought through. You must push forward, must take your objectives, must fight through whatever resistance you encounter, because there is no falling back. The only way out is through, and that means fighting room by room, corridor by corridor, deck by deck, through a vessel that might contain thousands of armed defenders who know their ship far better than you do. And yet, for all its horrors, boarding actions are essential to void warfare in the 41st millennium. Some ships are too valuable to destroy. They might contain ancient technology that cannot be replicated, sacred relics that must be recovered, or intelligence that must not be lost. Sometimes the goal is to capture the vessel intact for use by your own forces. Other times, simply destroying the ship with torpedoes or lance strikes isn't enough. The enemy must be exterminated to the last, their corruption purged with bolter fire and flame. And in the case of space hulks, boarding actions are the only way to search for the archaeotech treasures they might contain, even though such missions have a mortality rate that would be considered unacceptable in any other branch of military service. The Imperium has specialists for this kind of warfare. Space Marine boarding parties are the gold standard, their power armor allowing them to survive in hard vacuum if necessary, their bolters perfect for the close-range firefights of corridor combat, their combat shields and breaching charges designed specifically for forcing entry through reinforced bulkheads. Certain chapters, like the Imperial Fists, have long traditions of boarding actions and void combat. Their Terminators, clad in tactical dreadnought armor and armed with storm bolters and power fists, are practically ideal for the crushing melee that develops when two forces collide in a narrow corridor. But even Space Marines die in boarding actions, and they die in numbers that would horrify their brothers in planetary assaults. For regular human forces, boarding actions are even more nightmarish. The Imperial Navy maintains Voidsmen at Arms, trained specifically for ship defense and boarding operations. These soldiers are equipped with carapace armor, lasguns, boarding shields, and the grim knowledge that their life expectancy, once combat begins, can be measured in minutes. They train constantly in mock-ups of ship corridors, practicing the brutal close-quarters combat that characterizes void warfare. They learn to fight in zero gravity, in the dark, in sections of ship filled with toxic atmosphere or hard radiation. And still, when the real thing comes, when the enemy breaches their hull, or they're sent through a boarding torpedo to assault an enemy vessel, all that training often proves insufficient against the reality of what they face. Let us now delve deeper into this nightmare. Let us examine what it truly means to fight and die in the corridors of a void ship in the 41st millennium. We'll look at every stage of a boarding action, from the moment the assault begins to the final bloody conclusion. We'll explore the environmental hazards that make these vessels death traps even without enemy action. We'll discuss the weapons and tactics used in this uniquely horrible form of warfare. And we'll examine some of the worst threats you might face when boarding a vessel in Warhammer 40,000, from Genestealer cult ambushes to the demonic corruption that festers in chaos ships. What follows is not for the faint of heart. This is the reality of boarding actions in all their claustrophobic, violent, terrifying detail. This is what the Imperium's warriors face when they strap into boarding torpedoes or storm through breached airlocks. This is the horror of fighting in the void. The approach. Breaching the hull. Before you can fight inside a ship, you have to get inside it. And this initial phase is often where boarding actions suffer their highest casualties. the attackers are exposed, vulnerable, and completely committed to their assault. They're traveling through the void in craft that range from barely controlled missiles to purpose-built assault boats, all while the target vessel and its escorts do everything in their power to destroy them before they can make contact. Boarding torpedoes are the most common method for Space Marine boarding actions, and they represent a perfect example of Imperial philosophy applied to assault tactics. These are not sophisticated craft with careful guidance systems and gentle landing procedures. No, a boarding torpedo is essentially a giant drill with engines attached, designed to be fired at an enemy ship like a projectile, punch through its armor, and deliver its cargo of Marines directly into the enemy vessel's interior. The craft themselves are cramped, uncomfortable, and offer no real protection if they're hit during their approach. You're essentially riding inside a bullet, trusting in the Emperor's protection and the fact that you're a small, fast-moving target. The Space Marine's Histus assault ram represents a slightly more sophisticated version of the same concept. It's larger than a standard boarding torpedo, capable of carrying up to 10 Space Marines in full power armor or tactical dreadnought armor. The Histus features anti-gravitic technology discovered during the Great Crusade, allowing it to function both as a spacecraft and as a ground effect vehicle. At the front of the Histus is a Magna Melter, a massive melter weapon that fires in the moments before impact, weakening the target ship's hull so the assault ram's reinforced prow can punch through more easily. When a Histus hits an enemy ship, it doesn't just breach the hull, it pulverizes everything in its path, creating an entry point through which the Space Marines can pour into the enemy vessel. But let's focus on what it actually feels like to be inside one of these craft during the approach and impact. You're locked into restraint harnesses that are designed to keep you in place during the violent deceleration when the torpedo hits. The interior is lit by red emergency lighting and the green glow of your squad's equipment. There's no view screen, no way to see what's happening outside. You can hear the engines, a roar that vibrates through every surface. The hull is thick enough to provide some protection, but not thick enough that you can't hear the occasional impact of enemy point defense fire pinging off the exterior. Each hit sounds like a hammer strike, and you have no way of knowing if the next one will penetrate and turn the interior of your torpedo into a cloud of superheated plasma. The flight time varies depending on the distance between ships and the relative velocities involved, but it's rarely more than a few minutes. In that time, you're locked in with your thoughts and your brothers, unable to do anything but wait. Some Marines use the time for prayer, reciting litanies of protection or invoking the Emperor's blessing on their mission. Others perform last-minute weapons checks, even though there's nothing they can do if something is wrong at this point. The veterans, those who have done this before, often fall into a state of calm meditation, conserving their energy for what comes next. The newer Marines, those on their first or second boarding action, struggle to control their breathing and heart rate, to master the fear that comes from being helpless and exposed. And then comes the impact. Nothing truly prepares you for it. The boarding torpedo or assault ram is traveling at tremendous velocity when it makes contact with the target vessel's hull. The Magna Melter fires, creating a brief zone of incredible heat that turns solid adamantium into molten metal. Then the torpedo's drill, spinning at thousands of rotations per minute, makes contact. The deceleration is so sudden and so violent that even with the restraint harnesses, even with power armor or terminator plate to protect you, you feel like you've been hit by a drop pod slam. The noise is beyond description, a grinding, tearing shriek of metal on metal that resonates through your entire body. Anyone standing on the other side of the breach point at the moment of impact simply ceases to exist. The drill pulverizes them. The heat from the Magna Melter flash burns them. And the sudden decompression, if they're in an unpressurized section, scatters what remains. But you're not thinking about that because the assault is already beginning. The torpedo's front hatch, held in place by explosive bolts, blows outward with a bang that you feel more than hear through your helmet. Sometimes there's a blast of atmosphere rushing past you as the pressure equalizes. Other times, there's nothing, just the silence of vacuum if you've breached into a section that's already depressurized. Your restraints release automatically, and then you're moving, weapons up, following your squad leader through the breach and into the enemy ship. This is the most critical moment of any boarding action. You're emerging from a confined space into an unknown environment. You don't know the layout of the ship section you've entered. You don't know if there are enemies waiting on the other side of that breach. You don't know if the deck will hold your weight, or if you're stepping onto damaged plating that might give way beneath you. But you can't hesitate. Hesitation gets people killed. You have to move, have to clear the breach point, have to push into the ship and secure enough space that the rest of your squad can follow. Sometimes you're lucky. The breach point opens into an empty corridor or storage compartment, giving you precious seconds to orient yourself and form up before contact with the enemy. Other times you emerge directly into a firefight. The defenders have had time to prepare, to set up interlocking fields of fire covering the breach point. They're waiting for you with laser guns, bolters, heavy stubbers, whatever weapons they have available. The first Marines through the breach walk into a storm of fire that tests even ceramite armor. Men die before they've taken 3 steps into the enemy ship, cut down by sustained fire from multiple angles. This is why boarding shields were developed during the Great Crusade and saw extensive use throughout the Horus Heresy. These large tower shields, made of ceramite and plasteel, with small field generators similar to those in power weapons, were designed specifically for this moment. Breacher siege squads would lead boarding actions, their shields absorbing the initial barrage, while the rest of the squad used the cover to return fire and push forward. The shields couldn't stop everything. A Lascannon hit would punch through them, and sustained fire would eventually overload the field generators. But they gave the attackers a crucial few seconds to establish a foothold, and in boarding actions, seconds were the difference between success and catastrophic failure. For Imperial Navy voidsmen or Astra Militarum soldiers being sent on boarding actions, the experience is even more harrowing because they lack the protection of power armor. They're equipped with carapace armor at best, more often just flak armor and void suits that will keep them alive in vacuum, but won't stop much in the way of weapons fire. Their boarding craft are often less sophisticated than Space Marine assault rams, modified shuttles, or purpose-built assault boats like the Shark-class vessels used by some naval forces. These craft have the advantage of being reusable. They can deliver their troops and then extract them when the mission is complete. But they're more vulnerable during the approach and require secure landing zones or airlocks to discharge their passengers. When human soldiers board an enemy vessel, the first moments after entry are absolutely critical. They're trained to move fast, to flood through the breach point in sufficient numbers that the defenders can't focus fire effectively on any single target. They rely on weight of fire rather than individual superiority, laying down covering fire while their squads advance by leapfrogging from cover to cover. It's brutal work. The casualty rates are horrific. In some boarding actions, 50% losses among the first wave are considered acceptable if they achieve the objective of establishing a secure beachhead. And we haven't even discussed what happens when things go wrong with the boarding craft itself. Boarding torpedoes are not sophisticated machines. They're designed to make one trip and then be abandoned. Sometimes the drill mechanisms fail, and the torpedo doesn't breach the hull properly, instead glancing off the armor or becoming lodged partway through, leaving its occupants trapped inside with no way forward or back. Sometimes the impact is off-angle, and the torpedo breaches into a section that's already in hard vacuum with no atmosphere. And if the occupants aren't wearing helmets or aren't in sealed armor, they're dead before they can react. Sometimes the torpedo punches through into a compartment that contains something volatile, plasma conduits or fuel storage or ammunition magazines, and the breach ignites a catastrophic explosion that kills everyone in the torpedo and in the surrounding sections of ship. There's also the psychological burden of making the assault. You're committing to a course of action that has no real possibility of retreat. Once your boarding torpedo or assault craft commits to its attack run, you're going into that enemy ship whether you want to or not. If the mission goes badly, if your squad is cut off and surrounded, if the objectives prove impossible to reach, there's no easy extraction. You're trapped inside a hostile vessel, fighting for your life, with no support and dwindling ammunition. The only way out is to complete the mission and hope that extraction craft can reach you, or to fight your way back to your entry point and hope it's still accessible, or to die trying. This knowledge hangs over every boarding action, adding an extra layer of dread to what is already one of the most dangerous forms of combat imaginable. The approach and breach are just the beginning. They're the gateway into the real nightmare that is fighting inside a Voidship. But they set the tone for everything that follows. The violence of entry, the immediate contact with the enemy, the confusion of not knowing your surroundings, all of this combines to create a state of heightened tension that will only intensify as the boarding action continues. Environmental horrors. One of the most underappreciated aspects of boarding actions in Warhammer 40,000 is that the environment itself is often as deadly as any enemy you'll face. Void ships are not designed to be comfortable or safe. They're designed to travel through the warp, to survive void combat, and to house thousands of crew members in conditions that would be considered inhumane by almost any standard outside the Imperium. When combat breaks out inside such a vessel, all of the environmental hazards that the crew has learnt to live with become immediate threats to life and limb. Let's start with the most obvious danger: depressurization. Void ships are pressure vessels, maintaining a breathable atmosphere inside while surrounded by the infinite vacuum of space. The hull is designed to withstand this pressure differential, but it's not indestructible. Combat damage, whether from your own boarding action or from the larger void battle happening outside, can breach the hull and expose entire sections of the ship to hard vacuum. When this happens, everything not secured gets sucked out through the breach. The sea, air rushes out with the force of a hurricane. Anyone not anchored or in sealed armor is torn from their footing and dragged toward the breach, along with any loose equipment, debris, and anything else that isn't bolted down. Depressurization events kill in multiple ways. The most obvious is simply being sucked out into the void through the breach, where you'll die from either asphyxiation, explosive decompression, or exposure to radiation and temperature extremes. But even if you're not immediately ejected, rapid depressurization is lethal. The air in your lungs expands explosively, rupturing lung tissue if you don't exhale immediately. The moisture on your eyes and tongue boils in the low pressure. Your blood doesn't boil, contrary to popular myth, because your circulatory system maintains sufficient pressure, but you lose consciousness within about 15 seconds, as the oxygen in your bloodstream is depleted. Death follows within a couple of minutes. For this reason, experienced boarding troops never remove their helmets during an assault, even if they're in a section of ship that seems to have stable atmosphere. Veterans know that a stray shot or a detonation in an adjacent compartment can create a breach without warning. Space Marines in full power armor are largely immune to depressurization. Their armor is fully sealed and contains its own life support systems. They can operate in hard vacuum indefinitely, limited only by their armor's power supply and air reserves. Terminators, wearing tactical dreadnought armor, are even better protected and can survive in environments that would destroy lesser armor. But regular human soldiers, even those in carapace armor, are vulnerable. Standard Astra Militarum flak armor does not provide environmental sealing. Void's men at arms wear void suits under their armor, which will keep them alive in vacuum. But these suits are uncomfortable, restrictive, and not designed for prolonged combat operations. The suits will maintain pressure and provide a limited air supply, usually enough for 30 minutes to an hour, but fighting in them is exhausting, and their protection against enemy fire is minimal. Then there's the problem of gravity, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Void ships generate artificial gravity through various technologies, some better understood than others. On Imperial vessels, gravity is maintained by ancient gravitic field generators that are maintained more through ritual and prayer than actual understanding of their function. When these systems fail, either from combat damage or power loss, entire sections of a ship can suddenly transition to zero gravity. If you've never experienced combat in zero-G, it's difficult to convey just how disorienting and dangerous it is. Everything you know about movement and combat changes in zero gravity. There's no up or down. You can't plant your feet and brace for recoil when you fire your weapon. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so firing a bolter without being anchored to something will send you spinning backward. Moving requires pushing off surfaces and trying to control your trajectory, while simultaneously watching for obstacles and enemies in 3 dimensions rather than the 2-dimensional plane of normal ground combat. Close combat becomes a strange dance where combatants grapple and tumble together, both trying to land blows while simultaneously trying to maintain some control over their motion. Mag boots help, assuming you're equipped with them and they're functional. Space Marine armor comes standard with magnetic boot systems that allow them to lock onto ferrous metal surfaces. But even with mag boots, movement is slow and ponderous because you have to actively engage and disengage the magnets with each step. And mag boots don't work on all surfaces, only those with sufficient metal content and the right composition. Many Voidship decks are made of rockcrete or other non-ferrous materials, rendering mag boots useless. Fighting in zero gravity also makes ranged combat more difficult. Hitting a target requires accounting for your own movement, the target's movement in 3 dimensions, and the fact that you don't have a stable firing platform. Ballistic weapons like laser guns and bolters become harder to control. Explosives are actually more effective in some ways because their blast expands spherically rather than being channeled by gravity, but this also means they're more dangerous to the user. And if someone deploys frag grenades in an enclosed zero-G environment, the shrapnel doesn't fall to the deck. It continues bouncing around the compartment until it embeds in something, whether that's a bulkhead or a person. The temperature inside void ships varies wildly depending on location. Near the plasma drives and the reactor spaces, temperatures can reach levels that would be instantly lethal to unprotected humans. The tech priests and servitors who maintain these areas work in specialized heat-resistant gear, and even then, their assignments are usually measured in minutes rather than hours. If you're fighting through these sections during a boarding action, you're dealing with oppressive heat that drains your stamina and can cause heat stroke even inside armor with temperature regulation systems. Conversely, in sections far from the ship's heat sources or in areas where heating systems have failed, temperatures plunge to near absolute zero. The void of space is not cold in the conventional sense. It lacks temperature entirely because there's no medium to transfer heat. But hull sections exposed to the void or with failed heating systems will radiate their heat away into space, and temperatures drop precipitously. In these conditions, metal becomes brittle, lubricants freeze, and any exposed skin will suffer frostbite within seconds. Radiation is another constant threat aboard void ships, particularly those involved in void combat. The plasma reactors that power these vessels produce tremendous amounts of radiation, and while the reactor chambers are shielded, combat damage can compromise that shielding. Additionally, void combat involves the use of weapons that produce their own radiation, lances that fire coherent beams of energy, plasma weapons, melter weapons. All of these produce radiation as a byproduct. If you're fighting in or near sections that have been hit by these weapons, you're being exposed to radiation levels that can be lethal. Power armor provides significant radiation shielding, and Space Marines are genetically engineered to be more resistant to radiation than baseline humans. But even they have limits. Prolonged exposure to high radiation environments will sicken even an Astartes. For regular human soldiers, radiation exposure in a boarding action can be a death sentence, even if they survive the combat itself. They might make it off the ship alive, only to die days or weeks later from radiation sickness, their bodies breaking down at the cellular level from the damage inflicted by high-energy particles they never even saw. The atmosphere inside void ships can also be hazardous, even when it's not completely absent. Ships are huge, enclosed environments where thousands of people live and work, and maintaining air quality is a constant challenge. The air processing systems filter out carbon dioxide and other waste gases, add oxygen from storage tanks or recyclers, and scrub out contaminants. But these systems are not perfect, and in combat conditions, they often fail partially or completely. You might breach into a section where the atmosphere is thick with smoke from fires, reducing visibility to a few meters and making it difficult to breathe even with filters. You might enter compartments filled with toxic gases, byproducts of damage to ship systems, or deliberately released by defenders trying to slow your advance. Plasma leaks create clouds of superheated gas that will cook you inside your armor. Coolant leaks flood sections with cryogenic fluids or toxic chemicals. Engine rooms fill with exhaust gases that are both toxic and flammable. Fighting in these conditions requires sealed armor and environmental systems that can handle the contamination. And even then, you're operating in conditions that reduce your effectiveness and put tremendous strain on your equipment. Sound in a void ship environment during combat is a strange thing. In the vacuum sections, there's only the sounds transmitted through contact with surfaces, your boots on the deck, your armor touching a bulkhead. But in atmosphere, sound becomes almost overwhelming. Void ships are not acoustically dampened. They're full of machinery, ventilation systems, and thousands of people, all generating noise that echoes through metal corridors. Add combat to this, the bark of bolters, the scream of plasma weapons, the explosions of grenades, the shouts of soldiers, and it becomes a cacophony that can be disorienting and exhausting. Then there are the structural concerns. Void ships are constructed to withstand the rigors of void travel and combat, but they're not indestructible. The hull can be breached, bulkheads can fail, decks can collapse. When you're fighting inside a ship that's simultaneously engaged in void combat with other vessels, you're in an environment that's actively being damaged around you. Lance strikes from enemy ships punch through multiple decks. Torpedo impacts send shockwaves through entire sections. Reactor containment failures can destroy whole compartments. You might be advancing through a corridor when the deck above you collapses, burying you under tons of rubble. You might breach a bulkhead only to find that the compartment on the other side has collapsed into a jumbled mass of twisted metal, with no clear path forward. Fires are also a major concern. In atmosphere, any spark can ignite a blaze, and once fires start in a void ship, they're incredibly difficult to control. The fire suppression systems might be damaged or simply overwhelmed. Fires consume oxygen, creating zones where the atmosphere becomes unbreathable. They generate tremendous heat and toxic smoke. They spread through ventilation ducts and cable runs. And in some cases, fires can reach materials that shouldn't burn, but do anyway under the right conditions, creating infernos that can rage for hours or days. Void warfare also exposes ships to hazards from the warp itself, particularly if the ship has recently been in warp transit, or if the combat is taking place near a warp storm or other phenomenon. The warp is not just another dimension, it's a realm of pure psychic energy, where the laws of physics don't consistently apply, and where demons and other nightmares lurk. Ships that have been corrupted by chaos often have sections where reality itself is unstable. You might open a hatch and find that the compartment on the other side doesn't obey normal geometry, that the room is bigger than the space it occupies, or that time flows differently. These effects can drive even hardened warriors mad. Space hulks present all of these environmental hazards multiplied exponentially. Because these are conglomerations of multiple ships fused together, often after millennia drifting through the warp, their interiors are nightmarish mazes where each component vessel might have its own environmental conditions. You might be fighting through a section of ancient Imperial cruiser with working gravity and atmosphere, then pass through a junction into a chunk of orc wreck, where gravity points sideways and the atmosphere is toxic, then emerge into a segment of a ship so old that its design predates the Imperium itself, and its systems are completely incomprehensible. The corridors don't align properly. Rooms might be oriented at any angle. You might have to climb what used to be walls or crawl through spaces that were never meant to be traversed. All of these environmental factors combine to make boarding actions exhausting, even when you're not in active combat. You're operating in hostile conditions, your body and equipment under constant stress. Your armor's environmental systems are working constantly to keep you alive, draining power reserves. Your own metabolism is working overtime to deal with the physical and psychological stress. And all of this happens before you even consider the actual fighting you're doing against armed enemies who are trying to kill you. The architecture of death. The physical layout and architecture of voidships in Warhammer 40,000 are crucial factors in determining how boarding actions play out, and they present challenges that are unique to this form of warfare. These vessels are not designed with convenience or tactical clarity in mind. They're the products of millennia of tradition, religious doctrine, and occasionally functional engineering, all combined into structures that are as much Gothic cathedrals as they are warships. Fighting through such an environment requires adapting your tactics to an architecture that was never meant to be a battlefield, but becomes one regardless. Imperial voidships in particular are characterized by their sheer scale and complexity. A battleship might be 8 kilometers long and over 1 kilometer wide at its widest point. Inside this massive hull are hundreds of decks stacked vertically, thousands of compartments, countless corridors, and vast chambers dedicated to everything from weapons batteries to chapels to hydroponic gardens. The ships are so large that they contain entire communities, with crew members who have never seen the exterior of the vessel they serve on, and who might live their entire lives in the same section of ship, working the same machinery their ancestors tended for generations. This creates an immediate problem for boarding forces. You're entering a three-dimensional maze that defies easy navigation. The corridors of an Imperial voidship are not laid out in rational grids. They twist and turn, following the dictates of ancient construction methods and the need to route essential systems around each other. Ventilation ducts, power conduits, coolant pipes, all of these run through the walls and ceilings, creating a tangled web of infrastructure that makes the ship's layout maddeningly complex. Even with maps, which you're unlikely to have if you're boarding an enemy vessel, navigation is difficult because the maps themselves are often outdated or inaccurate, showing layouts that have been modified over centuries of repair and renovation. The corridors themselves are typically narrow, designed for crew members to move in single file or at most 2 abreast. This makes them perfect kill zones. A single heavy weapon emplacement at the end of a corridor can cover its entire length. Advancing down such a corridor means walking into a firing lane where you have minimal cover and the enemy has all the advantages. The defenders can set up interlocking fields of fire at intersections where multiple corridors meet. They can position troops in alcoves or behind corners, ready to ambush anyone passing by. They can wire entire sections with explosives, turning corridors into traps that can be detonated remotely. The hatchways and bulkheads that separate ship compartments are both obstacles and opportunities. These heavy doors, made of thick metal and reinforced against damage, can be sealed to contain atmospheric breaches or to prevent fire from spreading. In combat, they become strategic choke points. A sealed bulkhead can halt an attacking force's advance completely, forcing them to either cut through with breaching charges or heavy weapons, or find an alternate route. Defenders can use these hatchways to create defensive lines, falling back from one sealed bulkhead to the next, making the attackers fight for every meter of corridor. Cutting through a sealed bulkhead takes time and makes noise, alerting defenders to your position and intentions. Breaching charges are the fastest method, but they're loud and create a signature bright flash of light and blast that announces your presence. Melter weapons can cut through even heavy bulkheads given enough time, but you're vulnerable while doing it, focused on the cutting work rather than watching for enemies. Some elite units carry specialized equipment, like the Cestus assault ram's Magna Melta, or the heavy-duty breaching equipment used by Breacher siege squads. But even these require precious seconds of exposure. The actual chambers and rooms within a Voidship vary wildly in size and purpose. Some compartments are massive, like the weapons decks where the ship's broadside batteries are housed. These are cathedral-scale spaces, sometimes over 100 meters high, filled with the massive artillery pieces and loading mechanisms that make void warfare possible. Fighting in such spaces is almost like open warfare, with plenty of room to maneuver and multiple levels of catwalks and platforms creating vertical elements to the combat. But these spaces are rare. Most of the ship's interior is divided into smaller compartments, each dedicated to some specific function. Engine rooms and reactor spaces are particularly dangerous areas to fight in. These compartments contain the massive plasma reactors and warp drives that power the ship, along with all the associated support machinery. The machinery itself creates obstacles, huge pipes and conduits that block line of sight and create cover, but also hazards that you absolutely don't want to damage. Shooting into a plasma conduit can cause a breach that floods the area with superheated plasma. Damaging reactor shielding can cause radiation leaks, and if the reactor itself is hit by sustained fire or explosives, the result can be a detonation that destroys a significant portion of the ship, including everyone fighting in that section. The habitation decks where the crew live present their own, unique challenges. These areas are mazes of small compartments, communal spaces, and narrow passages designed to efficiently house thousands of people in minimal space. The crew quarters are cramped, barely large enough for a bunk and a small locker. The corridors between them are claustrophobic, often lit by flickering glow globes or emergency lighting. Fighting through these areas means clearing room after room, never knowing if the next compartment contains cowering civilians, armed defenders, or something worse. It's exhausting, paranoia-inducing work that grinds down even experienced soldiers. The bridge and command centers of a ship are usually the most heavily defended areas. These are the nerve centers where the ship is controlled, and losing them means losing the vessel. As such, they're typically located deep within the ship's superstructure, protected by multiple layers of armor and sealed bulkheads. The approaches to the bridge are designed as defensive positions, with narrow access corridors that can be easily covered by fire, redundant bulkheads that can be sealed in sequence, and often dedicated security forces whose sole job is to protect the command crew. Taking the bridge usually requires fighting through these prepared defenses, a slow and bloody process where every meter of advance is paid for in casualties. Vertical movement presents its own challenges. Void ships have multiple decks, and moving between them usually requires using access shafts, stairways, or lifts. These vertical passages are excellent defensive positions. A small force positioned at the top or bottom of a stairway can hold off attackers indefinitely, using their elevated position to fire down on anyone trying to advance. Access shafts and ladders are even worse, because you're completely exposed while climbing and can't effectively return fire. Lifts can be controlled by the defenders, either shut down completely or used as traps by sending them to levels where attackers are waiting in ambush. The Gothic architectural elements that characterize Imperial vessels add their own strange dimension to boarding combat. These ships aren't just functional machines, they're expressions of the Imperium's religious and cultural aesthetic. This means you have corridors lined with statues of Imperial saints, their stone eyes seeming to watch your every move. You have vast chapels and cathedral spaces dedicated to worship of the god Emperor, their soaring architecture and stained glass windows, creating environments that feel sacred even in the midst of violence. You have decorative elements like carved skulls, flying buttresses, stained glass, and ornate metalwork that serve no functional purpose but are included because they speak to the Imperium's cultural identity. These architectural elements can affect combat in unexpected ways. A statue provides cover, but it might be rigged to explode, or might topple during fighting. Stained glass windows are beautiful but fragile, and shattering them can cause depressurization if they're on an outer hull section. The Gothic aesthetic also means that many Imperial ships have strange, non-functional spaces, rooms that serve no purpose except to be impressive or spiritually meaningful. You might be fighting through a perfectly practical corridor system and suddenly emerge into a vast procession hall decorated with banners and mosaics, or into a reliquary filled with sacred artifacts, and have to figure out how to cross these spaces while under fire. Different factions design their ships according to their own cultural and practical considerations, creating unique architectural challenges. Chaos vessels are nightmares made manifest. The warp corruption that permeates them has often twisted their physical structure. Corridors might curve in ways that don't make geometric sense. Walls might bleed or pulse as if alive. The very air might be thick with whispers that crawl into your mind. Fighting in such an environment tests your sanity as much as your combat skills. The ship itself feels malevolent, actively hostile to your presence, and the longer you're inside it, the more you feel the corruption trying to seep into your thoughts. Orc vessels are crude and ramshackle by comparison, but no less dangerous. These ships are held together by orc engineering, which is to say, a combination of scrap metal, welding, and sheer belief in the orc gods. The corridors are wide enough to accommodate orc physiology, and they're dirty, covered in rust and grease and the detritus of orc habitation. The architecture is completely haphazard, with sections added on without any real plan, creating a labyrinth that confuses anyone trying to navigate it. The biggest danger in an orc ship isn't the architecture itself, though the risk of structural collapse is real because orc construction is terrible by any standard. It's that orcs inhabit these vessels in massive numbers, and they're all eager to fight anyone who boards their ship. Space hulks deserve special mention because their architecture is the result of multiple ships being fused together in the warp, creating structures that defy all logic. You might step through a hatchway from an Imperial cruiser into a section of Eldar craftworld with alien architecture that follows completely different design principles. The next junction might lead into a chunk of ship so ancient that its origins are unknown, with technology that predates the Imperium itself. Gravity might change direction from one section to another. Atmosphere might be present in one compartment and absent in the next. The hulk's structure shifts over time as it drifts in and out of the warp, meaning that passages that existed yesterday might be sealed today, and new routes might have opened up that weren't there before. All of these architectural factors combine to make boarding actions in Warhammer 40,000 unique tactical nightmares. You're not fighting on open battlefields, where doctrine and combined arms tactics apply cleanly. You're fighting in a three-dimensional maze, designed according to rules that often prioritize form over function, where your enemy knows the terrain far better than you do, and where the environment itself presents as much danger as enemy fire. Success requires adapting to these conditions, using the architecture to your advantage when possible, accepting that progress will be slow and costly, and maintaining the discipline to push forward even when every corridor looks the same and you've lost track of how far you've come or how far you still have to go. Combat in the corridors. Now we come to the heart of what makes boarding actions so uniquely terrible, the actual combat that takes place in these confined spaces. Everything about corridor fighting goes against the training that soldiers receive for conventional warfare. All the tactics that work in open environments or urban combat become problematic or impossible in the tight confines of a Voidship interior. What emerges is a brutal, close-range style of warfare that favors aggression, quick reactions, and the ability to function in chaos. The engagement ranges in corridor combat are shockingly short compared to other forms of warfare. On a battlefield, infantrymen might engage targets at ranges of 300 meters or more. In a hive city, engagement ranges drop to perhaps 50 or 100 meters. In the corridors of a Voidship, most combat happens at ranges of 10 to 30 meters. You're fighting people you can see clearly, whose faces you can make out through the chaos. This creates a psychological intensity that's different from ranged combat. It's personal in a way that artillery exchanges or long-range firefights are not. At these ranges, different weapons show their advantages and disadvantages. Laser guns, the standard armament of the Imperial Guard, and many naval armsmen, are adequate for corridor combat. They're accurate at short range, have good ammunition capacity, and produce little recoil, but they lack stopping power against heavily armored targets. A laser gun hit might not put down a target quickly enough at ranges where a few seconds can mean life or death. Bolters, by contrast, excel in this environment. The mass-reactive rounds they fire are devastating at short range, punching through armor and exploding inside the target. The sound of a bolter firing in an enclosed corridor is thunderous, almost deafening even with ear protection. The muzzle flash in dim lighting is blinding. But the results are undeniable. 1 or 2 bolter hits will drop almost any target. Shotguns are particularly favored for boarding actions by forces that have access to them. At ranges of 10 meters or less, a combat shotgun loaded with solid slugs or specialist ammunition like fléchettes is devastating. The spread pattern of shot shells makes precise aiming less critical in the chaos of close combat. The weapons are relatively simple and reliable, important factors when fighting in environments where equipment maintenance might be difficult. Voidsmen at arms units often carry combat shotguns as their primary weapons, specifically because of their effectiveness in shipboard combat. Flamers are terror weapons in corridor combat. A heavy flamer fired down a narrow corridor creates a wall of burning promethium that fills the entire passage. Anyone caught in that wash of flame is burned alive inside their armor. The psychological effect is devastating. Even hardened soldiers will break and retreat when they see flamers being deployed against them. But flamers are also risky to use. In confined spaces, the backwash of heat can affect the operator. If you're fighting in an atmosphere rich in certain gases, a flamer can cause an explosive reaction that kills everyone in the area. And flamers consume their ammunition quickly, making them useful for short, intense actions, but problematic for extended fighting. Plasma weapons are extremely effective, but correspondingly dangerous in the close quarters of shipboard combat. A plasma gunshot will vaporize an armored target, cutting through even power armor if it hits solidly. But plasma weapons generate tremendous heat, and in enclosed spaces, that heat has nowhere to dissipate. Sustained plasma fire can raise the ambient temperature to dangerous levels. Worse, plasma weapons have a tendency to overheat and sometimes catastrophically fail, causing them to explode and kill their operator. In a corridor where there's no room to take cover from such an explosion, this makes plasma weapons a calculated risk. Grenades become both more dangerous and more useful in corridor environments. A frag grenade detonated in an enclosed space sends shrapnel ricocheting off walls and ceilings, multiplying its effectiveness. The blast itself is channeled by the corridor, increasing overpressure in the area, but this also means you're at risk from your own grenades. Throwing a frag grenade down a corridor and then immediately advancing into that corridor is a good way to catch some of your own shrapnel. Smart troops use grenades to cover their advance, throwing them into compartments before entering. But the delay while the grenade detonates can give defending forces time to prepare or retreat. Melter bombs and breaching charges are essential tools for boarding actions, used to cut through sealed bulkheads or destroy hardened positions. But their use is noisy and obvious. Every time you breach a bulkhead, you're announcing your position to every defender in that section of ship. The debris from the breach can also be hazardous. Metal fragments and molten material flying through the corridor, creating a temporary hazard zone that you then have to push through. Close combat weapons see extensive use in boarding actions because of the short engagement ranges and the frequent need to fight in spaces too confined for ranged weapons to be practical. Chainswords are the iconic close combat weapon of the Imperium, and they're brutally effective in corridor fighting. The whirring chain of diamond-hard teeth can carve through armor and flesh with terrifying speed. They're relatively light and maneuverable, important in tight spaces where larger weapons would be awkward. Power weapons, which surround their blades with an energy field that disrupts molecular bonds, can cut through almost any material and are favored by officers and veteran troops. But power weapons require maintenance and power cells, making them less reliable in extended operations than simpler weapons. Combat shields and boarding shields, which we discussed earlier in the context of the initial breach, continue to be valuable throughout a boarding action. A shield bearer can advance down a corridor with some protection from enemy fire, allowing the rest of the squad to follow in their wake. The shield can be used offensively as well, shield bashing an enemy to knock them down or back, creating openings for lethal follow-up attacks. But shields are heavy and awkward in confined spaces, and they limit your own offensive options because one hand is occupied with holding the shield. The tactics of corridor fighting are brutal and straightforward because sophisticated maneuvers are often impossible in such confined spaces. The basic method is fire and movement, with elements of the squad suppressing enemy positions while others advance to better positions. But better positions in a corridor are limited. You might advance to a doorway that provides some cover, or to a junction where you can use the corner for protection. But often there's simply nowhere to go, and advancement becomes a matter of walking into enemy fire and accepting casualties while you work to eliminate the defenders. Breaching rooms and compartments is a specialized skill that boarding forces must master. The basic technique is to blow or breach the door, throw in grenades if possible, and then flood into the room with multiple entry points if available. The first soldiers through the door are at highest risk, facing whatever enemies are inside with minimal cover and no time to properly assess the situation. But speed is essential because hesitation gives defenders time to prepare or eliminate the first few soldiers through the breach. The doctrine is to enter fast, spread out to avoid clustering, identify targets, and engage them before they can effectively respond. Squad tactics in corridors are limited by the space available. A typical infantry squad of 8 to 10 soldiers cannot all fight effectively in a corridor that's only 3 meters wide. They're forced to advance in column, with only the front 2 or 3 soldiers able to engage targets. This makes the formation vulnerable to flanking attacks if the enemy has access to alternate routes. It also means that the effectiveness of the squad is limited by the effectiveness of those front. Few soldiers, if they go down, the whole advance stalls. Some forces use specialized formations for corridor combat. Space Marine boarding parties often advance with a shield bearer or terminator in front, their superior armor allowing them to absorb fire that would devastate less protected troops. Behind them come battle brothers with bolters or assault weapons, ready to engage targets as they appear. This formation is slow, but nearly unstoppable against all but the most determined resistance. For regular human forces, the tactics are less refined because they lack the armor protection and superhuman abilities of the Astartes. They rely more on suppressing fire and weight of numbers, accepting higher casualties as the price of advancing. Communication becomes difficult in the chaos of corridor combat. The noise of weapons fire in enclosed spaces is deafening. Voxcasters help, allowing units to maintain voice contact even in the noise. But Vox signals can be jammed or disrupted by the ship's systems or by enemy countermeasures. Hand signals work at short ranges but become impossible to see in smoke or poor lighting. This communication breakdown means that units can become separated and isolated without their commanders knowing what's happening to them. The psychological strain of corridor combat cannot be overstated. You're fighting in a confined space where you can't see more than a few meters ahead, where every corner might hide an ambush, where the enemy can appear from unexpected directions through hatches or vents. The constant alertness required is exhausting. The fear of being trapped, of being surrounded with no escape route, weighs on even veteran soldiers. After hours of this kind of fighting, men become jumpy, prone to firing at shadows or friendly forces glimpsed in the dim lighting. The confusion of boarding actions also leads to friendly fire incidents. In the chaos of combat, with poor visibility and high stress, soldiers sometimes shoot first and identify targets later. This problem is compounded when multiple units are operating in the same area without perfect coordination. You might clear a room only to have friendly forces breach through a different door seconds later, and in the split second of mutual surprise, soldiers on both sides might fire before recognizing each other as allies. For defenders, corridor combat offers significant advantages. They know the layout of the ship. They know which corridors lead where, which can be bypassed, which are dead ends. They can prepare defensive positions in advance, setting up fields of fire and reinforcing their positions. They can fall back through prepared positions, making the attackers fight for every section of corridor. They can use their knowledge of ship systems to their advantage, cutting power to sections to plunge attackers into darkness, venting atmosphere from compartments, or using other environmental controls to hinder the enemy. Attacking forces must overcome these advantages through aggression and momentum. Once a boarding action begins, stopping means giving the defenders time to organize and reinforce their positions. You must keep pushing forward, accepting casualties, trusting that your own reinforcements and supplies can keep up. This creates a pressure cooker effect where both sides are committed to a fight that becomes increasingly desperate as it continues. The physical toll of extended corridor combat is severe. Soldiers are fighting in heavy armor or environmental suits, breathing recycled air, often in extreme temperatures. They're carrying heavy loads of ammunition and equipment. The adrenaline of combat sustains them initially, but after hours of fighting, exhaustion sets in. Reaction times slow. Aim becomes less precise. Judgment becomes impaired. Men make mistakes they wouldn't normally make, and in corridor combat, mistakes are usually lethal. The defender's advantage. While we focused primarily on the experience of boarding an enemy vessel, it's important to understand the perspective and advantages of the defending force, because these factors dramatically influence how boarding actions play out. Defending a void ship against boarders is, in many ways, a more enviable position than attacking one, but it comes with its own unique challenges and horrors. The most obvious advantage defenders possess is knowledge of the terrain. They've lived and worked in this ship, possibly for years or even generations if they're part of the hereditary crew that's common on Imperial vessels. They know the layout intimately, not just the main corridors, but also the service passages, maintenance ducts, and shortcuts that don't appear on any official schematic. This knowledge allows them to move through the ship more quickly than attackers, to set up ambushes at strategic locations, and to predict where the enemy will likely go based on the objectives they're trying to achieve. Defenders can prepare the battlefield before the enemy arrives. Once sensors detect incoming boarding craft or spot enemy ships maneuvering for boarding range, the defending crew has precious minutes to prepare. Bulkheads can be sealed to channel attackers through specific corridors. Heavy weapons can be positioned to cover likely breach points. Reinforcements can be moved into position. Ammunition and supplies can be pre-positioned at defensive strongpoints. In those few minutes of warning, a competent defensive commander can create a layered defense that will make the attackers pay in blood for every meter they advance. The control of ship systems provides defenders with options that attackers simply don't have. The defensive commander can manipulate lighting, plunging sections into darkness to hinder enemy movement, while defenders, familiar with the layout, can operate more effectively. They can control atmosphere, either venting it from sections to expose attackers without sealed armor to vacuum, or introducing toxic gases if the ship's systems allow for such measures. They can lock bulkheads remotely, trapping enemy units in kill zones or cutting them off from their fellows. They can even, in desperate situations, deliberately depressurize entire sections or flood them with fire, accepting the loss of those areas and any crew in them as necessary sacrifices to stop the enemy advance. Many Imperial void ships have voidsmen at arms, dedicated naval security forces whose primary purpose is to defend the vessel against boarding actions. These soldiers are specifically trained and equipped for shipboard combat. They understand the unique challenges of fighting in confined spaces. They're familiar with the ship's layout. They train constantly in mock boarding scenarios. Most importantly, they fight with the knowledge that this is their home they're defending. There's no retreat from a boarding action if you're a defender. If the attackers take the ship, you're either dead or captured, and capture by many of the Imperium's enemies is a fate worse than death. Void's men-at-arms typically wear void-hardened flak or carapace armor and carry laser guns or shotguns as primary weapons, with las pistols as sidearms. They're trained to fight in teams, with established doctrine for clearing corridors, setting up interlocking fields of fire, and conducting fighting withdrawals through prepared positions. The best units are equipped with specialized gear like boarding shields, heavy weapons for defending key positions, and breaching equipment for counter-attacking and retaking compromised sections. Many ships also have servitors deployed in defensive roles. These lobotomized cyborgs can be armed with heavy weapons and positioned at key choke points. They don't feel fear or fatigue and will continue fighting until destroyed. Against lightly armored attackers, a heavy bolter servitor positioned at the end of a corridor is a formidable obstacle. But servitors lack tactical flexibility and can be outmaneuvered by clever opponents who find ways around their positions. On Space Marine vessels, the defense might be handled by chapter serfs, ordinary humans who serve the Adeptus Astartes. These individuals are often augmented with basic combat training and equipped with whatever weapons the chapter can spare. While they're not Space Marines themselves, they fight with religious fervor to protect the chapter's vessel and will die before allowing enemies to desecrate a Space Marine ship. The psychological advantage of defense should not be underestimated. Defenders are fighting on their own ground in familiar surroundings. While this doesn't eliminate fear, it does provide a measure of comfort compared to the experience of attackers who are in hostile, unknown territory. Defenders can also take heart from the knowledge that help might arrive, that friendly forces elsewhere in the ship are fighting too, that they're part of a larger defensive effort rather than isolated and alone like an attacking unit that's become separated from its fellows. However, defending a ship also has significant disadvantages that can turn apparent advantages into liabilities. The first is that defenders are often outnumbered at the point of contact. A boarding assault is typically launched with overwhelming force at specific breach points. The defending force might outnumber the total attacking force across the entire ship, but at each individual breach, the attackers achieve local superiority by concentrating their strength. This means that the first defenders to engage the boarders are often overwhelmed before reinforcements can arrive. The unpredictability of where and how the enemy will board creates a dilemma for defensive commanders. You can try to predict likely breach points based on the enemy's approach vectors and protect those areas heavily, but if your predictions are wrong, you've wasted your best troops guarding areas that never see combat, while the actual breach points are defended by inferior forces. Some commanders choose to hold reserves centrally and rush them to breach points as they're detected. But this requires time and the ability to move troops quickly through the ship, both of which may be in short supply during a chaotic boarding action. The compartmentalized nature of Voidship architecture that helps channel attackers into kill zones also works against defenders in some ways. Once a section is breached and compromised, sealed bulkheads mean that reinforcing that section or launching counterattacks becomes difficult. You might have thousands of troops available elsewhere in the ship, but if the corridors between them and the compromised section are sealed or controlled by the enemy, those troops might as well not exist. This can lead to situations where different parts of the ship are isolated and fighting their own separate battles with no coordination or mutual support. The morale factor for defenders is complex. While they have the advantage of defending their home, they also face the psychological burden of knowing that the ship they rely on for survival is being violated. Every enemy that breaches the hull is a threat not just to military objectives, but to the lives of everyone aboard. If the attackers reach critical systems, if they manage to damage the reactor or life support, the entire crew dies regardless of how bravely the armed defenders fight. This creates a pressure that can lead to panic, particularly among crew members who are not trained combatants. When word spreads through the ship that the enemy has boarded, that they're killing their way through the corridors, it's common for untrained crew to either flee toward the center of the ship seeking safety, or to arm themselves with whatever weapons they can find and rush toward the fighting in disorganized groups that get slaughtered by enemy forces or accidentally shot by their own side. There's also the problem of collateral damage to the ship itself. Defenders need to be careful about what they hit when they're shooting at enemies. That bulkhead behind the enemy position might be concealing a critical power conduit. That deck plate might cover a coolant line. Explosives used to destroy attacking forces or to collapse corridors behind them to slow their advance can damage the ship's structure in ways that create new vulnerabilities. While it's true that attackers face the same concerns, defenders have more of an investment in keeping the ship intact and functional. In some boarding scenarios, the defenders are already compromised before the attack even begins. Genestealer cults infest ships from within, their members posing as loyal crew while secretly serving the Tyranid hive mind. When these cults rise up in conjunction with an external boarding action, the result is chaos. Defenders don't know who they can trust. The crew member standing next to you might be a cultist waiting for the signal to attack. Security forces spend as much time dealing with internal threats as external ones, and the paranoia this creates can be as damaging as the actual cultist attacks. Chaos corruption presents a similar problem, but with different manifestations. A crew member who has been corrupted by chaos might not even know it consciously until the moment when the corruption takes control and turns them into a weapon against their fellows. Or the corruption might be more subtle, leading to crew members sabotaging defensive efforts or providing information to the enemy, without really understanding why they're compelled to do so. The defender's last resort, the nuclear option if you will, is to destroy the ship rather than let it fall into enemy hands. This is doctrine for many Imperial ships, particularly those carrying sensitive cargo or information. If the boarding action is going badly, if the enemy is going to capture the vessel, the captain can order the ship scuttled. This usually means detonating the plasma reactor or overloading the warp drive, either of which will destroy the ship and everything nearby. For the defending crew, this means that even victory is not guaranteed to ensure their survival. If they repel the boarders, but the captain has already initiated self-destruct protocols, they might die anyway, which creates an interesting morale problem. Why fight to the death to defend a ship that your own commander might destroy? Despite all these challenges, defending a ship successfully is possible and happens regularly. A well-trained, well-led defensive force that uses the ship's architecture and systems to their advantage can repel boarding attempts even by numerically superior or better equipped attackers. The key is maintaining coherent command and control, using interior knowledge to outmaneuver the enemy, and having the discipline to conduct fighting withdrawals through prepared positions rather than breaking and running when the pressure becomes intense. The enemy within, genestealers, and worse. If there's anything that makes boarding actions even more terrifying than they already are, it's the knowledge that the enemy you're fighting might not be the only threat inside the ship. Voidships are massive, complex environments with countless dark corners and forgotten spaces where things can hide. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, the things that hide in those spaces are often far worse than any conventional enemy force. Genestealers are perhaps the most iconic threat, associated with boarding actions and space hulks in Warhammer 40,000. These Tyranid organisms are vanguard creatures, sent ahead of the hive fleets to infiltrate and infest worlds in preparation for the coming swarm. They're perfectly adapted for life aboard space vessels, able to survive in vacuum, resistant to radiation, and possessing an alien cunning that makes them horrifyingly effective predators in the confined spaces of Voidship corridors. A purer strain Genestealer is a nightmare given physical form. It stands roughly human height, but is far stronger and faster than any human. Its six-limbed body is covered in a purple-blue carapace that provides natural armor against most weapons. Its hands and feet end in huge claws, capable of tearing through ceramite power armor. It has a grotesquely elongated head and a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. But perhaps most terrifying is their speed. Genestealers move with lightning quickness, able to cross a corridor and close to melee range before most soldiers can react. They can cling to walls and ceilings, attacking from unexpected angles. They're intelligent enough to use tactics, setting ambushes, and coordinating their attacks. Worse still is the Genestealer's kiss, the method by which they infest new victims. Genestealers possess an ovipositor, a tube-like organ they use to implant genetic material into their victims. A person who receives the Genestealer's kiss doesn't die immediately. Instead, they're infected at the genetic level and placed under the psychic control of the Genestealer patriarch. They're compelled to return to their normal life, to hide what happened to them. And then, when they have children, those children are hybrid creatures, part human and part Genestealer. Over 4 generations, a single Genestealer can create an entire cult of hybrid servants who will help it spread further while appearing superficially human enough to blend into normal populations. This means that when you board a ship that's been infested with Genestealers, you're not just fighting the creatures themselves. You're also facing Genestealer cultists, human or hybrid servants of the broodmind, who might look almost normal, but are absolutely fanatical in their devotion to the creatures they worship as gods. The first-generation hybrids are obviously non-human, with oversized heads, multiple arms, and clawed limbs. But by the 3rd and 4th generation, the hybrids can pass for human at casual inspection, meaning they might be hiding among the ship's crew or even in your own boarding force if the infestation has spread to your own vessel. Boarding a Genestealer-infested vessel or space hulk is a unique kind of nightmare. The standard tactics of corridor clearing and room breaching don't work as well because Genestealers don't hold positions like conventional soldiers. They ambush from above, dropping from vents or ceiling panels onto unsuspecting targets. They swarm from multiple directions, using their numbers and speed to overwhelm defenders. They fade back into the darkness after attacks, avoiding sustained combat in favor of hit-and-run tactics that gradually wear down their opponents. The psychological effect of fighting Genestealers is devastating. The creatures are alien in a way that even other Xenos aren't. There's something fundamentally wrong about them, something that triggers primal revulsion and fear in the human psyche. The sounds they make, clicking and hissing noises that echo through dark corridors, are unnerving. The idea that they might be hiding anywhere, that they could attack at any moment from any direction, creates a state of constant tension that exhausts soldiers mentally before they're ever physically challenged. Space hulks infested with Genestealers are the worst-case scenario. These massive conglomerations might host thousands or even tens of thousands of the creatures, along with multiple broodminds and patriarchs. The hulk's labyrinthine interior provides infinite hiding spots. Sections might be sealed off for centuries and then suddenly opened, releasing Genestealers that have been dormant for decades. The creatures have had unlimited time to prepare the environment, creating nests in strategic locations, setting up ambush points, and learning every passage and crawl space in their domain. The Imperium has protocols for dealing with Genestealer-infested vessels and hulks. Space Marine boarding actions against such threats usually involve Terminators, because the Tyrannid's tactical dreadnought armor provides the best protection against Genestealer claws. The iconic game Space Hulk, which has been released in various editions over the years, depicts exactly these kinds of missions. Small teams of Space Marine Terminators fighting through Genestealer-infested space hulks to achieve critical objectives. The mortality rate of such missions is horrific even for Space Marines. Entire Terminator squads have been lost to a single mission, their gene seed unrecoverable because no one survives to extract it from the fallen. But Genestealers aren't the only internal threat you might face during a boarding action. Chaos corruption takes many forms, and vessels that have been exposed to the warp or that serve traitor forces present their own unique horrors. A chaos-corrupted ship is not simply a vessel with hostile crew. The ship itself has often been changed by exposure to warp energies, warped into something that defies natural law. Demons might infest such vessels, entities of pure warp energy given form in the material realm. Unlike physical enemies, daemons don't necessarily need to travel through corridors or follow physical laws. They might appear suddenly in any space, materializing from thin air or stepping out of shadows. They're immune to many conventional weapons. Only blessed or psychically charged weapons can reliably harm them. And their presence alone can drive mortals mad. The sight of a demon causing fear, despair, or insane rage in those who witness them. Chaos cultists and traitor Astartes are perhaps more conventionally dangerous, but no less horrifying. These are humans or space marines who have willingly embraced the ruinous powers, and in doing so, have often been twisted into something monstrous. They might bear mutations, extra limbs or sensory organs, or stranger changes wrought by their demonic patrons. They fight with fanatical zeal, welcoming death as a release into their god's embrace. They use corrupted weapons and have access to sorcerous powers that defy Imperial understanding. The environment itself in a chaos ship can be hostile. The walls might whisper blasphemous truths that erode your sanity. The geometry of rooms might be wrong in ways your mind struggles to process. Time might flow strangely, with minutes feeling like hours, or vice versa. These effects make fighting in such vessels exhausting mentally, even if you never encounter a physical enemy. And all the while, the corruption is trying to seep into you, to find the cracks in your faith and exploit them, to turn you from a loyal servant of the Emperor into another puppet of the dark gods. Orc vessels present dangers that are more straightforward but no less lethal. Orcs inhabit their ships in massive numbers, with entire tribes living in what amounts to mobile fortresses. The ships are filthy, poorly maintained by Imperial standards, and liable to explode or fall apart without warning. But they're defended by countless orcs who see any boarding action as a grand opportunity for a good fight. Orcs are incredibly tough, shrugging off wounds that would kill humans, and they're physically strong enough to tear a man apart with their bare hands. Boarding an orc vessel means fighting through wave after wave of greenskins, each one eager to prove their strength in combat, and knowing that every orc you kill will be replaced by 2 more rushing to join the fun. Even aboard apparently loyal Imperial vessels, there might be threats beyond the crew's control. Ancient ships sometimes harbor things in their forgotten sections, entities that have been sealed away for centuries and that the current crew might not even know exist. Rogue servitors, malfunctioning and hostile. Strange Xenos life forms that snuck aboard at some distant port. Machine spirits that have gone mad over long centuries. Ancient tech that activates unexpectedly, unleashing dangers that were supposed to be safely contained. These are rare threats, but on vessels that have been in service for millennia, the phrase, "we don't go to that section of ship," often exists for very good reasons. The strategic implications of these internal threats are significant. When planning a boarding action, you're not just concerned with the vessel's crew. You need intelligence on what else might be aboard. Is the ship infested? Has it shown signs of chaos corruption? What's its history? Where has it traveled? What kind of things might it have picked up along the way? Sometimes this intelligence exists, but often you're boarding blind, discovering threats only when you encounter them, by which point it's usually too late to adjust your plan. For defenders, internal threats can be as dangerous as external ones. A Genestealer infestation might remain hidden for years, the cult growing in the ship's underbelly, until some trigger causes them to rise up. When that happens, it's not a boarding action from outside, it's a civil war within the ship, as infected crew members attack their uninfected comrades. The paranoia this creates is crippling. You can't trust your fellow crew members. That person you've worked alongside for years might be a Genestealer hybrid waiting for the signal to attack. Security becomes impossible when the enemy is already inside and indistinguishable from loyal crew until they reveal themselves through violence. Strategic objectives and tactical nightmares. While we've spent considerable time discussing the experience and tactics of corridor combat during boarding actions, it's crucial to understand that these operations aren't conducted merely for the sake of fighting. Every boarding action has objectives, strategic goals that justify the tremendous cost in lives and resources required to assault a Voidship. Understanding these objectives and the challenges of achieving them provides important context for why boarding actions are conducted despite their horrific nature. The most straightforward objective for a boarding action is to capture the vessel intact. Voidships are valuable assets, and some are irreplaceable. Ancient vessels might incorporate technology that the Imperium can no longer manufacture. Ships blessed by the Mechanicus might contain sacred machinery whose machine spirits cannot be replicated. In these cases, simply destroying the vessel with torpedoes or lance fire isn't acceptable. The ship must be taken, which means boarding it, fighting through its defenders, and reaching critical control points that allow you to secure the vessel before its crew can scuttle it. The bridge is the obvious primary target for any boarding action aimed at capturing a vessel. This is where the ship is commanded from, where the captain and senior officers direct all operations. If you can take the bridge, you can potentially control the entire ship, assuming its systems are still functioning and the crew is willing to accept new management. But, as we discussed earlier, the bridge is typically the most heavily defended location on the ship, positioned deep within its superstructure and protected by multiple layers of security and sealed bulkheads. The route to the bridge becomes a nightmare of prepared defenses, with every corridor a kill zone and every junction a potential death trap. Even if you successfully fight your way to the bridge, taking it is only the beginning. You then need to secure your hold on the vessel, which means controlling other critical locations. The Engineerium is essential, containing the plasma reactors and warp drives that power the ship. Without control of engineering, the crew can shut down power or destroy the engines, rendering your capture of the bridge meaningless. The armory needs to be secured to prevent the crew from accessing heavy weapons or conducting organized resistance. Communications centers must be taken to prevent the crew from calling for help or coordinating their defense. The life support systems need to be controlled, both to ensure you can keep the ship's atmosphere stable and to prevent the crew from using those systems against you. This creates a fundamental problem for boarding forces. You can't achieve all these objectives simultaneously because you don't have unlimited troops. You must prioritize, deciding which objectives are most critical and accepting that others might not be taken in time. Do you push for the bridge first, hoping to decapitate the command structure, but risk the crew destroying the engines before you can secure them? Or do you split your forces, sending smaller teams to multiple objectives, but risk those teams being defeated in detail because they lack sufficient strength to overcome prepared defenses? The time pressure of boarding actions intensifies these decisions. Many vessels have self-destruct systems, and a captain who knows they're about to lose their ship will often activate these systems rather than allow the vessel to fall into enemy hands. This means you might have only minutes from the time you breach the hull to reach the bridge and prevent the captain from initiating self-destruct protocols. Every minute spent fighting through corridors, every delay caused by sealed bulkheads or fierce resistance, brings you closer to catastrophic failure, where the entire ship explodes with you still inside it. Some boarding actions have different objectives entirely. Rather than capturing the vessel, you might be tasked with destroying it from within. This seems counterintuitive. Why board a ship just to blow it up when you could simply destroy it with external fire? The answer lies in certainty and preventing enemy response. If you destroy a ship from outside with torpedoes and lances, you might damage it heavily, but not destroy it completely, leaving it crippled, but potentially salvageable. And the ship's crew has time to transmit final messages, to launch escape pods, to perform any number of actions before their death. But if you board the ship, fight to the reactor or ammunition magazines, place explosive charges and detonate them, you guarantee the ship's destruction and give the crew no opportunity to respond. These demolition missions are often suicide runs. The boarding team knows they might not have time to fight their way back to extraction points after planting the charges. They're accepting death as the likely outcome, making the mission one of pure dedication, where success is measured not in personal survival, but in achieving the objective at any cost. Such missions are typically given to the most fanatical troops, whether that's Space Marines who view death in the Emperor's service as the ultimate honor, or penal legions who see it as a chance to redeem themselves in death after lives of failure. Intelligence gathering is another common objective for boarding actions. An enemy vessel might contain information that's too valuable to lose. Codebooks, star charts, intelligence on enemy dispositions or plans, captured Imperial personnel who know sensitive information. In these cases, the objective isn't to take or destroy the ship. It's to reach specific locations, acquire the intelligence, and extract before the enemy can respond effectively. These missions require speed and precision rather than the grinding advance of a general assault. Small, elite teams are typically used, striking fast to their objectives and withdrawing before the defense can organize. The challenge with intelligence gathering missions is that you often don't know exactly where your objective is located. You might know it's somewhere in the administrative sections of the ship, but those sections might comprise dozens of decks and hundreds of compartments. You need to search while simultaneously fighting off defenders and working against a ticking clock, because the longer you're aboard, the more likely you are to be overwhelmed by responding enemy forces. And all the while, you need to worry about the enemy destroying the intelligence you're trying to capture. Smart commanders will have protocols to destroy sensitive materials if the ship is boarded, meaning you need to reach your objectives before those protocols are executed. Space Hulk missions deserve special mention because their objectives are unique and their challenges extreme. The Imperium sends boarding parties into Space Hulks primarily to search for ancient technology and archaeotech. These massive derelicts might contain ships that are thousands of years old, potentially housing technology from the dark age of technology that would be invaluable if recovered. But Space Hulks are also incredibly dangerous, infested with genestealers and other horrors, structurally unstable, and prone to slipping back into the warp without warning. The time pressure on Space Hulk missions is immense. A Hulk might only be in real space for days or even hours before it transitions back into the warp. If you're still aboard when that happens, you're lost, condemned to drift through the warp until you either die or the Hulk returns to real space at some random point in the future, assuming you somehow survive that long. This means every Space Hulk mission is a race against time, with boarding parties trying to locate valuable technology, extract it, and evacuate before the Hulk's warp drives activate. The tactical challenges of achieving objectives in any boarding action are compounded by the difficulty of maintaining coordination and communication. In conventional warfare, commanders have overwatch, aerial reconnaissance, communications networks that allow them to track the progress of their forces and adjust plans based on real-time intelligence. In boarding actions, none of this exists. Once your forces breach the hull and push into the enemy ship, you often lose direct communication with them. The ship's structure blocks Vox signals. Enemy jamming disrupts communications. Individual units become isolated, fighting their own battles with no awareness of how the larger operation is progressing. This means that boarding actions often devolve into a series of independent small unit actions rather than a coordinated assault. Squad leaders make their own tactical decisions based on local conditions. Units discover objectives that weren't part of the original plan and have to decide whether to pursue them or stick to their assigned missions. The chaos of it all means that successful boarding actions often succeed not through perfect execution of a plan, but through the aggregate of 1,000 individual decisions made by soldiers in the thick of combat who simply keep pushing forward despite not knowing the larger picture. Navigation itself becomes a challenge that can determine success or failure. Imperial void ships rarely have clear signage or maps that would help orient borders. The corridors all look similar, the architecture is repetitive, and after fighting through dozens of identical passageways, it's easy to become lost. Some boarding forces bring specialist navigators or use Auspex equipment to track their position, but these methods are imperfect. Getting lost in an enemy ship during a boarding action is a death sentence. You exhaust your ammunition fighting through sections that don't bring you closer to your objectives. You become separated from your fellows. Eventually, you're surrounded and cut down, having achieved nothing. The psychological burden of these operations weighs heavily on the soldiers conducting them. You're advancing into unknown territory with unclear information about the layout, the defenses, or even whether your objectives are achievable. You're watching friends and brothers die around you with no certainty that their deaths are accomplishing anything meaningful. The mission parameters might change during the operation based on new information or changing circumstances, and you might not even know about it because communications are disrupted. You're simply told to keep fighting, to keep advancing, to trust that somewhere up the chain of command, someone knows what they're doing and that this nightmare you're living through serves some greater purpose. The aftermath, victory or death. Eventually, every boarding action reaches a conclusion. The attackers achieve their objectives, or they fail and die trying, or some middle ground is reached where partial success is deemed acceptable. But regardless of the outcome, the cost of voidship boarding actions in the 41st millennium is always measured in blood. Let's examine what happens when the fighting finally stops, or at least slows to the point where someone can claim victory. If the attackers achieve their primary objectives, if they capture the vessel or accomplish their mission and survive to see the end of it, they're left with the aftermath. Bodies litter the corridors, both friendly and enemy. The ship is damaged, systems offline or malfunctioning from combat damage. The atmosphere might be compromised in multiple sections. Fires might still be burning in compartments that haven't been reached. And there's the grim work of consolidation, securing the vessel fully, rooting out any remaining resistance, and beginning the process of restoration. The casualty rates of successful boarding actions are often appalling. Losses of 30 to 50% are not uncommon for the assaulting force, even in operations that are considered successful. These casualties are concentrated among the units that made the initial breach and led the advance, meaning that elite formations often suffer the worst losses. Space Marine companies that participate in boarding actions might lose significant portions of their strength, casualties that take decades to replace, given the time required to recruit and train new battle brothers. For the defending force, unsuccessful defense means death or capture for most of the crew. Those who survive the actual fighting often die in the aftermath as attackers conduct searches through the ship, rooting out anyone hiding in the countless compartments and passageways. The fate of captured crew depends on who has taken the ship. If it's other Imperial forces, you might survive to face interrogation and potential return to service, assuming you can prove you didn't surrender dishonorably. If Chaos forces have taken the ship, death would be preferable to what awaits you. If Orcs or Tyranids have boarded successfully, there are no survivors, just biomass to be consumed or more bodies to add to the horde. The ships themselves rarely survive boarding actions undamaged. The fighting tears through their interiors, damaging systems, breaching bulkheads, causing fires and explosive decompression. Even when the ship is captured relatively intact, it requires extensive repairs before it can be put back into service. These repairs might take months or years, depending on the severity of the damage and the availability of repair facilities. Some vessels are so badly damaged that they're written off entirely, relegated to salvage or scuttling despite the effort taken to capture them. There's also the grim calculus of whether boarding actions are worth conducting in the first place. The resources required to train and equip elite boarding troops are substantial. The losses suffered in these operations are difficult to replace. And the objectives achieved, while sometimes valuable, don't always justify the cost. This is why boarding actions are relatively rare in the grand scope of void warfare. Most combat between void ships is resolved through conventional weapons fire, with boarding reserved for special circumstances where the potential gain justifies the terrible cost. When boarding actions go badly for the attackers, when the mission fails and the boarding force is wiped out or forced to retreat, the lessons learned are written in blood. Failed boarding actions teach commanders about the challenges of these operations in the most brutal way possible. They reveal the inadequacies of doctrine, the limitations of equipment, the difficulty of achieving objectives against determined resistance in the confined spaces of voidship interiors. And they consume valuable troops, whose training and experience are lost forever when they die in enemy corridors, far from any hope of recovery. Extraction from a successful boarding action is itself a challenge that's often underestimated. You've achieved your objectives, secured the critical locations, neutralized the defenders. Now you need to get your troops off the ship, either to return to your own vessels or to establish control if you're occupying the captured ship. But the routes you used to enter might no longer be viable. The boarding torpedoes are one-way craft, abandoned at their breach points. Assault boats that drop troops off need to return and extract them, but they might not be able to reach all the extraction points if some areas are still too hot with fighting or are blocked by damage. Sometimes units get left behind, cut off from extraction routes by enemy counterattacks or by ship damage that renders passages impassable. These soldiers face the choice of trying to fight their way to alternate extraction points or hunkering down to wait for rescue that might never come. Some survive through sheer determination, holding out in fortified positions until relief forces reach them. Others die alone in enemy corridors, their final stands unknown and unremembered because there's no one left to tell their stories. The psychological aftermath for survivors is rarely discussed in Imperial doctrine, but it's significant. Soldiers who have fought through boarding actions carry those experiences with them. The claustrophobia, the close-range violence, the uncertainty and fear, all of it leaves marks. Many develop what would be recognized as post-traumatic stress in other contexts, though the Imperium rarely acknowledges such conditions. Veterans of boarding actions often request assignment to any other duty rather than face another such mission. Even Space Marines, genetically engineered and psychologically conditioned to handle the stress of warfare, can be affected by particularly brutal boarding actions. The ships that survive boarding actions often bear scars that never fully heal. Sections that were vented to vacuum might not be fully repaired, left as dead zones in the ship's interior. Compartments where particularly fierce fighting occurred might be sealed off and declared cursed or haunted by superstitious crew. The machine spirits of ships that have been violated by enemy boarding are said to never quite recover, their functioning affected in subtle ways by the trauma of having been infiltrated and fought over. Whether there's any truth to this, or whether it's simply the result of imperfect repairs and battle damage that was never fully addressed, the end result is that ships that have been boarded are often considered unlucky or problematic by future crews. For Space Marine chapters, the loss of battle brothers in boarding actions has implications beyond the immediate tactical concerns. Each fallen Marine represents decades of training and genetic legacy lost. If the gene seed cannot be recovered because bodies are irretrievable in the aftermath of the action, it's a blow to the chapter's future. This is why some chapters are reluctant to commit to boarding actions unless absolutely necessary, preferring other methods of achieving their objectives that don't risk their precious gene seed in the meat grinder of shipboard combat. The Imperium as a whole treats boarding actions as necessary evils, operations that must sometimes be conducted despite their terrible cost because the alternatives are worse. The doctrines exist, the training is conducted, the specialized equipment is maintained, all in recognition that voidship boarding actions will continue to be necessary as long as humanity fights in space. But there's no glory in these operations the way there might be in conventional battles. They're dirty, brutal, grinding affairs where survival is often more about luck than skill, and where the only reward for success is that you live to face the same nightmare another day. In conclusion, we've journeyed through the nightmare that is Voidship boarding actions in Warhammer 40,000, examining every aspect of this uniquely horrifying form of warfare. From the violence of the initial breach to the grinding combat in narrow corridors, from the environmental hazards that make ships death traps to the psychological toll of fighting in confined spaces against enemies that might be lurking around every corner, we've seen why these operations are among the most dreaded assignments in Imperial service. The reality of boarding actions defies romanticization. This is not warfare as glorious battle. This is combat at its most primal and claustrophobic, where all the advantages of technology and doctrine are stripped away, and what remains is simply the question of whether you have the courage and skill to walk into a kill zone and somehow survive to reach your objectives. The casualty rates speak for themselves. The psychological damage to survivors is profound. The ships themselves rarely survive undamaged, and yet these operations continue because sometimes they're the only way to achieve critical objectives. Because sometimes the value of capturing or destroying a ship from within justifies the terrible cost of doing so. For the soldiers who conduct boarding actions, whether they're Space Marines in power armor, Voidsmen at arms in their void suits, or any of the countless others who fight in ship corridors, each operation is a test of everything they are. It tests their courage, their faith in the Emperor, their trust in their squad mates, their willingness to walk into horror and keep fighting when every instinct screams at them to flee. Many fail this test and die as a result. Those who pass it are forever changed, carrying with them the memory of what it means to fight in the most hostile environment imaginable, inside a ship that's simultaneously a war machine, a habitat, and a tomb. The next time you look at the impressive void battles depicted in Warhammer 40,000 lore, the grand naval engagements with their lance strikes and torpedo spreads, remember that sometimes the outcome of these battles is determined not by the ships themselves, but by the actions of small groups of soldiers fighting and dying in corridors most people will never see. Remember the boarding torpedo crews riding missiles into enemy hulls. Remember the Voidsmen at arms defending their ships against impossible odds. Remember the Space Marines fighting through Genestealer-infested space hulks. Remember the countless unnamed soldiers who died in unnamed corridors aboard forgotten ships, their sacrifices enabling the Imperium to claim one more victory in a war that will never end. This is the reality of boarding actions in the grim darkness of the far future. This is what it means to fight in the void. This is the price that must be paid to wage war in space, where the battles take place, not on the hulls of ships, but within them, in a nightmare of narrow corridors, unknown enemies, and certain death awaiting those who falter for even a moment. If you found this deep dive into the horrifying reality of Voidship boarding actions fascinating, and want to see more detailed explorations of Warhammer 40K lore, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore in the 41st millennium, and your support ensures we can continue bringing you these comprehensive, atmospheric looks into the darkness that defines the universe of Warhammer 40,000.